As a driven dentist, you see the world differently. Where some see scarcity, you see abundance. When others want to give up, you keep going. You're building an amazing life of significance. That means you can't rely on ordinary advice from ordinary advisors to get to your goals. You want advice that's going to help maximize your net worth so you can take even better care of the people you love, the causes you care about, and make your dent in the universe. But the fact is, this advice remains hidden because relatively few professionals are well versed in them, and the extremely affluent don't care to let you know about them. Join us as we pull back the curtain to reveal the often hidden advice and strategies used by today's most successful individuals and families. Welcome to Dental Wealth Nation. Here's your host, Tim McNeely.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Dental Wealth Nation. And I am so excited about today because we're talking about a problem that could be lurking in your office. Imagine walking in one day and that long-term office manager you've had or front desk person, all of a sudden you've discovered that they may have been stealing with you. What would be going through your mind? What would you be thinking? I know I wouldn't find that very pleasant. And that's why today is so important. You're going to know by the time we finish today, you're going to know why embezzlement is actually a bigger problem than you've ever imagined. You're going to have a new awareness of how to protect what you've worked so hard for from being unjustly taken from you. But most importantly of all, you're going to feel encouraged and you're going to know that there's a solution for this problem that could be happening in your office. And when it comes to helping dentists protect themselves from employee theft, there's no one better than David Harris. David Harris is dentistry's crime fighter. And what I really love about David is that he's got that hard job. He's got a difficult job of fielding those calls saying that office manager who's worked for me for 20 years, I think they're stealing. And as a trusted advisor, he gets to come in there and help you get back on your feet and get your feet back on the ground so that you can get back to doing what you love. David, welcome to the show.
I am so excited to be here, Tim.
Man, I mean, what a crazy thing to have happen, and it's not a rare thing, is it? Embezzlement happens quite a bit, doesn't it?
The best number I can give you is that about 70% of your audience, 70%, will get hit sooner or later.
That's 7 out of 10 dentists. That's huge.
And maybe it's minor. Maybe it's somebody stealing pens from the front desk, or rounding their hours up by 15 minutes or something like that. And maybe it's millions of dollars.
Wow. And this is, it's a widespread problem, but it's also pretty niche. How did you get started in dealing with this and really working with embezzlement, right? Who says, I want to go discover thieves?
Well, I didn't. And how I got here is a pretty good story. I would like to tell you that I had a vision, I saw an opportunity and I went after it. The truth was a lot more accidental than that. So it started in high school when the phone call came to my parents, and the basic gist of the phone call was, it's time for David and the school to stop wasting each other's time. I was a couple of months into my sophomore year. So suddenly, Tim, I was 15 years old and I had a lot of time on my hands. And 15-year-olds with time don't always use it wisely. Pretty soon the police were coming by my parents' house with some frequency. And eventually I got put in front of a judge. And the judge to give you the chronology, this was 1977. The judge kind of looked me up and down and he said to me, green or orange? Yeah, I had a look like that. Like, what are you talking about? And he read my look and he clarified. And he said, Mr. Harris, I'm giving you a choice of what you can wear next week. And suddenly it occurred to me that orange is the color you wear in prison. And of course, green belongs to the Army. So I said, green, please. And went off to the Army. I was a little bit underage, but this was right after the end of the Vietnam War, and military was having trouble making its recruiting quota. So they were, somewhat forgiving. And recruiting sergeant helpfully stepped out of the office for a smoke break and left the photocopier unattended so I could adjust my birth certificate. So away I went. And to my surprise, and probably everybody else who knew me, I I prospered. I did really well. I got promoted quickly. And eventually I got put in a position where I needed a college degree that, of course, I didn't have, or a high school diploma for that matter. So the Army sent me to college. And I finished that and was back working, and I actually broke my back. I was in a Jeep accident and I broke my back, and I had a year when I couldn't really do much physically. So, after some discussion, they sent me back to do my master's. And I finished my master's degree, and I served out the rest of my time. In 1987, I became a long-haired civilian and went to work for a bank. And didn't last very long. This bank, and I think probably you could say this about most banks, they just insisted on making the same mistakes over and over again. I was doing investigation there, and I quit one day, 1989. I was sitting at home and bored silly. This is before there was a PVR or Netflix or anything like that. I mean, what you got to watch in August was exactly what the networks chose to give you, which wasn't a lot. So I was sitting there watching TV, bored. And my phone rang, and when I answered it, it was a guy I'd been in high school with in my quick trip there, who had become a dentist. And he said to me, "David, I think my front desk person's stealing from me, and I really don't have anyone else to call." So his timing was perfect. Like I say, I was just climbing the walls, and I said, "Okay, I'll come to your practice tonight after you close, and we'll get to the bottom of it." So I went to his practice, and this is before practice is computerized. So it was the old pegboard system that people used to use. And basically there was a card called a ledger card for each patient that showed how much money they owed. And I got there, and this guy kind of shoved a tray full of these cards at me. I said, "No, we're going to go at this a little bit differently. Show me where she works." So he took me to her desk. And I started going through her desk. Well, of course, my friend's going bug-eyed and, like, "Can you do this?" Well, yeah, I can. It's not actually her desk. It's your desk. It's just, she uses it when she works for you. So I started going through her desk, and after a minute or two, I found what we call in the trade her cheat book. So this is where, and when thieves start corrupting the records of a practice, they have to keep track of what's real and what's fiction. So now it's more likely to be an Excel spreadsheet, but in those days it was like a grade school notebook. So I found taped under one of her drawers the cheat book, and once I had that, the whole thing unraveled pretty fast. He'd lost about $35,000, which was big numbers then, and he wasn't happy about the loss, but he was glad that I could wrestle it to the ground quickly. So he hit me up for one more favor. He said, "Can you come back in the morning, because I'm going to fire this woman, and I don't feel like doing that by myself." Okay, I'm pretty sure I'll be bored tomorrow too. Let me come back in the morning. So we got that done. My friend promised to buy me dinner that I'll mention I'm still waiting for. And I walked away kind of shrugging my shoulders and thinking, all right, that was interesting, but I didn't really see a career. 2 weeks later, that changed in a hurry. And what happened was I had an appointment at my own dentist office. And I was about to go in. I had my hand on his door, and I looked through the glass in his door, and sitting at my dentist's front desk was the same woman I helped fire 2 weeks ago at my friend's office. What I said next, I will not repeat on your G-rated show. I sprinted to a payphone because, in 1989, you just didn't carry a cell phone around. Called the practice, used a little bit of deception to get past the gatekeeper and talk to my dentist. And when he picked up the phone, what I said to him verbatim was, because what I did was I identified myself as a local orthodontist when she answered the phone as a way of getting put through to my dentist. So when he picked up the phone, I said, "It's not Dr. Jensen. I'm David Harris. I'm the guy who's supposed to be in your chair right now, but let me explain why I'm not." And I told him about the time bomb that was sitting at his front desk, and he panicked and hired me. And that was my first client. By the time I finished his work, the local Henry Schein rep realized what I was doing. And he had a couple of other dentists he had concerns about. And suddenly, Tim, I was in business.
Wow.
So that's how it started.
Wow.
You talk about lightning striking. That was it.
Wow, that's amazing. And going back to that statistic you mentioned, right? 7 out of 10, right? Approximately is what we see. And right in that first case that you mentioned, why was the doctor even suspecting that something was going on? Are there some usual signs of activity or something that usually triggers a doctor to say, something's not adding up?
There certainly are. There are really two kinds of warnings. The first ones are financial ones. And what triggered this doctor was a financial warning, and it was a patient complaining about their bill.
Hmm.
The other kind of warning signs are behavioral. And a lot of times they're the ones that get people caught. The American Dental Association did a study where this question was kind of peripherally asked. And what came out of the study was 68% of embezzlement was detected by behavior
Hmm.
and 32% by some kind of financial irregularity.
Now, right, you say a patient complaining about their bill, and the first thing that hits me is like, that's probably not that unusual, is it?
Well, it's unusual when the complaint goes to the doctor.
Ah, okay.
Most of the time when patients complain to the bill about their bill, they're complaining to the embezzler.
Mm,
So that's not going to get them caught. But
okay.
in this case, a patient said something to the doctor in the operatory
Ah,
that prompted the doctor to dig in a little bit deeper.
so it really was just kind of a random comment from the patient mentioning it to the doctor that helped the doctor to think, hey, something's probably going on here.
Absolutely. And that's really common. The overwhelming majority of embezzlement is caught by what I would broadly call dumb ass luck,
Hmm.
where some unexpected chance occurrence causes the embezzlement to come out as opposed to kind of the planned operation of somebody's systems. Another example, a pretty big embezzlement I worked on early in my career came to light when the thief broke her leg skiing one weekend. And Monday morning, for the first time anybody could remember, she wasn't in the office.
Mm.
And one of the receptionists got 3 phone calls from patients, which were the same kind of thing about their bills. And after the third call, she went into the senior doctor's operatory, took him out of it, and said, "Yeah, there's something weird here." And he called me.
Wow.
And that was about $600,000 that this woman had taken, which was huge in 1991.
Wow. Now, in a little bit, I want to touch on some protection strategies in being proactive, but it really sounds like the majority of cases are like what you said. They're randomly caught because there are no procedures or practices or systems in place to identify these things. So it is that random comment or the patient saying something, or you look at your bank statement and you're like, why is there less money here? And so it sounds like a lot of it is just being caught randomly instead of proactively.
No question. I mean, I think that very fact is an indictment of doctor systems.
Hmm.
The other thing, though, is that we shouldn't ignore the behavioral clues. And when we talk about those, I mean, let's make it more concrete. What kind of things are we talking about? Well, a lot of thieves are reluctant to take vacation, and I mentioned the woman who sort of was on an involuntary vacation because she broke her leg, and that's when the wheels came off her wagon. Um, a lot of thieves like to do their stealing when they're alone in the office. So they'll organize their schedules, they'll get there before everybody else, or they'll stay after the rest of the team leave, or they'll kind of quietly slip into the practice on a weekend. The one thing that can terrify a thief is the word consultant.
Mm.
So we get a fair number of calls from consultants, and they always go the same way. David, I've been a consultant for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And I understand that not every staff member is overjoyed to see me walk through the front door, but I'm working in one office right now, and the pushback I'm getting is well beyond the sort of normal resistance to change, and I'm wondering what's behind it.
Hmm.
Um, so that's another behavioral thing. The other thing I'll say is thieves process differently. So let's say you and I are walking down the street in your town, and we see somebody's wallet fall out of their pants in front of us. What most people do is they stoop down, they pick up the wallet, they walk a little faster, and they go back to whoever dropped it and said, "Sorry, your wallet fell on the ground." And a thief may end up doing that too, but they're going to ask a couple of questions before they do that you might not. Like, I wonder if anybody else saw that wallet fall. I wonder how much money's in it. Based on those answers, their behavior may be the same as yours. On the other hand, they may decide, well, okay, there's money in this wallet. Nobody saw it fall. I'll just keep it for me.
Wow. Well, right. Let's talk a little bit about the why people embezzle. Right. In your experience, right, are there some common reasons employees embezzle?
Yeah, in a broad sense, there are. Thieves steal for one of two reasons, which are need and greed. And needy thieves have something happening in their lives that stresses their family finances. So if you want the classic case, Tim, think of the economics of divorce. And you start with two incomes supporting one household. And from that, you evolve to two incomes supporting two households and throw in a bunch of attorney bills. And suddenly, the comfortable living that people had before is upset. And sometimes in that situation, people steal. Maybe there's an addiction. Maybe spouse lost his job. There are lots of potential triggering factors, but it's a case where they just can't make the family books balance each month, and somebody's stealing to fill that hole. And then you have greedy thieves, and they're a little bit different. I mean, they feel like society undervalues them, and they're stealing what they think they should be paid in the first place. And a lot of these people will look at their doctor as basically this lovable, high-functioning moron with good hands.
Wow.
Yeah, I know it's a huge oversimplification, and if I were in the audience, I might bristle at somebody describing me that way. But that's the picture a lot of thieves have, and in their worldview, the only reason that doctor's successful is because I keep her chair full, and then when patients leave it, I make sure they pay. And they can sort of talk themselves into an otherwise unrecognized partnership with the doctor, at least in their minds. So they kind of convince themselves that they're entitled to this money, and then they take what they've convinced themselves they're entitled to.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. So it's really, like you said, it's need and greed that are driving these things.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the way you can differentiate those two is how they spend the money. I mean, the needy people pay the rent, or they put gas in the car. The greedy people, buy designer clothes, or they buy front row concert tickets, or they buy that car that they could never afford on their salary.
Okay. And so those are little clues too. If all of a sudden the employee starts showing up with things they probably can't afford, that could be a sign that something's going on.
It could be. We should be a little cognizant that we don't necessarily know everything about our people's finances. And sometimes I've had calls where there was suspicion, but what it turned out was somebody got an inheritance from their distant uncle or something like that. There was something else that the doctor didn't know about.
Okay.
But I'm agreeing generally with your point that living beyond your means is definitely a warning sign.
Well, but I mean, I think that also raises an interesting question of, right, how do you, be proactive and have your eyes open, but not necessarily be overburdening either, and accusing where you shouldn't be accusing? Because I'm guessing there's a balance in there somewhere.
Well, the first thing I'll say is I think a lot of dentists don't know their staff as well as they should. And it's interesting when you look at a dental office and you look at what happens at lunchtime. Let's assume the whole office closes for lunch. Doctor goes in their private operatory or the private office, and they go on their computer and they check the stock market, or they surf porn, or whatever they do at lunchtime. And the staff all go in the break room together. And, it creates that insularity where the doctor is not, the doctor's only interaction with staff happens during work, when there's a subject matter called a patient. One thing I say to dentists is once a week, maybe twice a week, have lunch with your team.
Hmm.
And, you might have to bribe them with food a little bit if they find this kind of creepy at first, because it's different than your pattern. But make a point of sitting there in the break room with them for 40 minutes. The stock market will wait, and get to know them as people. And then if you do that for a while, you'll understand who's got their eye on that new house. Maybe even the offer's been accepted, but they're not sure if they can qualify for the mortgage. And you'll know, whose husband is off work because, they had a workplace accident or whatever. And you'll start to have a much better picture of what's driving your team.
Wow. So really just something as simple as getting to know your team and sitting down with them once a week or every other week. That can be a protection strategy just by getting to know your team. And actually, we've got some viewers watching and liking. If you've got questions for David, just go ahead and put those below and we'll ask them live. So if you've got questions on your practice or how you can protect yourself, just go ahead and put those below. We'd be happy to answer them. So David, talking about protection strategies, right? We mentioned getting to know your staff. Are there some other safeguards that can be put in place to protect your practice against embezzlement?
Absolutely, there are. And I could talk for hours on this topic, but I'll keep it fairly tight. The first thing is, one thing that dentists in general do a terrible job of is pre-employment screening. Dental practices, most dentists thoroughly despise hiring staff. And, when you feel that way about a job, you try to make it as quick and painless as possible. And you don't do things that are going to prolong your agony, like pre-employment screening. But I'll give your audience a really sobering statistic, Tim. 70 million Americans, which is 1 in 4 adults, has a criminal record.
Wow.
So even failing to do basic things like a criminal records check create a huge exposure to a practice. And not just to embezzlement. I mean, that's also the child molester, the axe murderer, the shoplifter, whatever, who you're about to hire. So criminal records check is part of it, but there's a lot more to pre-employment screening than that. Speaking with former employers, if somebody's in a position where they handle money, checking their credit status. If you can do it, checking their driving record is a really good idea, because one thing we've noticed about thieves is that a lot of them have huge amounts of motor vehicle violations. And it's stupid stuff, driving without a seatbelt or, expired license plates or something like that. I think where it comes from is that a lot of embezzlers have the belief that the rules that apply to the rest of society don't also apply to them. And, check with your HR advisors before you start doing this, because there are some definite issues with getting a driving abstract as part of a pre-employment screening. But if you can do it in a specific situation, you often learn a lot about somebody by how they handle themselves behind the wheel.
Wow. That's fascinating. So I know in the world of hacking and computer systems, right? There's the white hat hackers, the hackers that you hire to come in and try to bust your system and find the vulnerabilities. Does that kind of thing exist within the embezzlement world too? Is bringing someone in to really look at those systems and kind of stress test where the weaknesses are?
It's funny you should ask that. We do two things at Prosperident, my company. The first thing we do is, and what we're best known for, is what we call our reactive services. So that's where somebody reaches out to us and says, I think, or I've caught my staff member stealing red-handed, and now I need you to investigate and see what's really going on. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing we do is proactive work. And the idea here is very simple. It's to close the loopholes in a practice before an embezzler gets there first. And it's no different, Tim, than if you were a dentist and I was your patient. And I said to you, Dr. McNeely, I want to spend the least money in my lifetime on my teeth. What should I do? And your answer would be brush and floss like crazy and see our hygienist every 6 months, because the cost of doing those 3 things is a whole lot less than the cost of me fixing what's going to break if you neglect And I'll say exactly the same thing here. Prevention is much, much, much better than the cure. So
Hmm.
we offer that service where we will find the weaknesses, help train the doctor in financial oversight, because they all say the same thing to us. There's nowhere to learn that. We didn't get it in school. There's no, there's no course, there's no book. We'll sit there with a doctor looking at their software together, help them decide what reports they need, understand what's in those reports, what constitutes an outlier, what do you do when you find that outlier? And they all say, yeah, I've been practicing for 15 years and this is the first time anybody's done this with me.
Yeah. Wow. And do you cover some of these things in your book, Healer versus Stealer?
We do. Yeah, there's a lot of good information there. So the book's called Healers versus Stealers: How to Outsmart the Thief in Your Practice. And it's available on Amazon and through lots of other fine booksellers. It's my second book. The first one was a little bit skimpier, Healers versus Stealers, which I just happen to have here. It's about 300 pages. And, it deals with a lot of situations. For example, there's a chapter on orthodontists, because the way that orthodontists get stolen from is a little bit different than, say, a general dentist or a pediatric dentist. There's a chapter on DSOs, because, again, the theft patterns in DSOs are a little bit different than what would happen in an owner-operated practice. So it deals with some situations. There's a lot of the book that is devoted to hiring and how not to hire somebody who's done this before. And
that feels like that's kind of the most obvious step, is don't hire the thief in the first place.
it's so true. The only problem with that is that, there are serial embezzlers who will victimize more than one practice. In fact, the most extreme one I saw hit 15 different practices over about a 20-year period.
Oh, my word.
She was like the Energizer bunny of embezzlement. But the other danger is the long-term employee who wakes up one morning and says, okay, I'm 57 years old. There's no pension plan here. I'm not really comfortable with the amount I have in my 401k. And, I better be like the squirrel starting to hide some nuts for winter. And we see a lot of people who are working in a practice for 15 plus years, and then one day they start stealing. So the hiring is essential, and one of the easiest, cheapest protections you can have, but it's not a complete solution. The other thing that dentists do, or should do, is what we call financial oversight. And to make it as simple as I can, every practice has practice management software. The software tracks three things: fees, in other words, what was charged to the patient; adjustments; and payments. And payments are the amount that come in according to practice management software. And very simply, payments should equal deposits. And there are two kinds of dentists, Tim. There are those who sit there at the end of each day with their report, and they go to their online banking and they make sure that the right amount went into the bank. And then there's the other 85%. If you're in that 85%, stealing is easy. If you don't know how much money should be going into the bank account today, and I'm your office manager, it is the easiest thing in the world for me to just peel away some of your deposit and keep it myself. And I don't have to do anything exotic in your software. I just divert money. So if $32,000 was collected today, but I can get away with depositing $31,200, then I just put $800 in my pocket.
Wow.
So that oversight part, and we cover that in a lot of detail in my book. And we also work extensively with dentists when we work with them one-on-one on that topic. Is so important. And the good news, the thing probably that people don't realize, is it takes a lot less time than they think if you do it right.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question for you. Is so often we think these things take a lot of time and effort, right? Because you got to monitor and check deposits and look at all these things. And so, what is the time commitment to get these things set up and monitor everything?
Well, the first thing I'll say about that oversight is, if you want it to be, it could be zero. Because what has to happen for the reconciliation calculation is mechanical. I mean, it could be done by your son in college. There's nothing about that requires a dentist. There are other parts of monitoring that require not only dental knowledge, but somebody who was there today and knew what happened. But in terms of do deposits equal collections, it's mechanical. So it can be outsourced, not delegated, not to a staff member, because that's kind of like asking the fox if he'd mind holding the keys to the hen house while you go to the gym for an hour. But it does not have to be the doctor. The second thing, though, is that we have this idea that activity should happen at the end of each day. And that comes from the old pegboard manual systems that preceded practice management software, because there really wasn't a good concept of a monthly report in pegboard. The whole focus was tracking each day. So at the end of the day, the doctor would check the deposit against collections, and assuming all was good, go home. And that's still the mentality people have. If you want to make this process much, much easier, that's an activity that should be done at the end of each month. In other words, do monthly collections line up with monthly bank deposits? And the thing that makes that calculation harder is timing differences. So think about a patient who pays by credit card today, and the practice management software captures that as a payment today. But with most credit card companies, it takes a couple of days for that to get in your bank account. So if you're trying to look at what happened today, you can't do it, because there's sort of this unknown piece that won't be settled for a couple of days. On the other hand, when you expand the window and you look at a month at a time instead of a day, most of those timing differences have self-resolved. I mean, now the only stuff that's kind of confounding you is the transactions that overhang the first day of the month and the last day of the month, which is a whole lot less as a percentage than what would happen if you look at a day in isolation. And it's just less work to do that calculation once than 20 times.
Yeah.
There's another piece, though, that has to happen when you move this to monthly, and it's called articulation. And when I talk to a dentist about articulation, what they're thinking about is the mandible and the maxilla and how they're supposed to fit together. Yeah, exactly. How they're supposed to fit together. And this is similar. What the articulation calculation says is this: if your practice was open 18 days this month, and in your left hand you have 18 day end reports from your software, and in your right hand you have a month end report, if you totaled up the 18 reports for fees, adjustments, and payments, they should exactly equal the totals on the month end report. If they don't, Tim, what it means is somebody came in after hours and did stuff they didn't want you to see. So articulation is a way of making sure that everything that happened this month was seen by you.
And it really is as simple as just matching up the numbers and making sure they match.
Put it on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It's a 10-minute job for somebody to do that. And again, it does not have to be the doctor. It shouldn't be a team member. But if you have a spouse who will do it, if you have a kid in college, if your bookkeeper will take this on, there's somebody who will do that for you. Probably for not a lot of money. I mean, if it's your son in college, you can just pay them in beer.
Yeah, well, right, and I love that, because I think this starts hitting on just having a different thought process about how to think about embezzlement in your practice. You don't have to be in there with the magnifying glass, looking at all the books, at everything. You just got to do some high-level things to make sure the numbers are matching up.
Yeah. Now, just before everybody thinks they're free, and they don't have to listen to the rest of this presentation, I will mention one thing. The way thieves look at the doctor is, does the doctor oversee the balancing process that the office manager does? That's the 15% who do and 85% who don't. If the answer to that question is no, then the way I steal is I just divert the deposit, as we were talking about. How do I steal if the doctor is comparing collections against deposits? I can still do it. It's a little bit harder, but now what I need to do is trick the software into lying about how much money was collected. And I'm not going to get into details of how that happens, but what I'll say is, in any practice management software, it's possible. So you can trick the software to underreport collections, and that's the other thing you have to monitor for. In other words, do the dollars line up is question number one, and question number two is, now that I've put that articulation safeguard in place to make sure that I'm seeing every single transaction that happened this month, do any of them not make sense?
Yeah, right. Exactly right. Is there a patient refund that shouldn't have taken place, or whatever it is?
100% adjustment on a patient treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there something there that I look at it and say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
So it really seems like there's kind of different levels of protection that you want to put in, whether it's starting with the hiring and then looking at the monthly reporting and the articulation, and then, even checking the practice management software. So you've got different levels that you want to look at as you're going through this. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is. And the total time commitment for a doctor to do what we would tell them to do is probably less than 2 hours a month.
Wow. Well,
and for those who say, that's not what I signed up for, if you want to be a practice owner, that comes with some responsibility.
Yeah. If
you don't want that responsibility, that's fine, but don't be a practice owner. Be an associate. Work for DSO. Go to an FQHC, or join the military. I mean, there are other for the dentist who says, I want to be a pure clinical dentist and I don't want to get my hands dirty with any of this stuff. There are plenty of outlets. That's the person who shouldn't be a practice owner.
Yeah. Or you need to build the team, the trusted team who's not in the office, who can help you do these things. Like you mentioned, maybe it's the bookkeeper or the son in college or the spouse, right? A trusted advisor.
The trusted advisor is good
too, but
the trusted advisor is good. But if you're a business owner, you have to wake up in the morning and say, all right, with the privileges that owning a business gives me comes some burdens.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I can never switch off from this. I can never say, I've handed that out to somebody, so I don't ever have to think about it again. And I talk to dentists a lot about the difference between delegation and abdication. And
go into that difference, because I think that's an important differentiator for people to understand.
Delegation is, Tim, you're my employee, or you're an independent contractor who I outsource to, and I'm giving you this job to do, and I'm going to hold you accountable for that, and I'm going to enforce that accountability. And abdication is when I say to you, Tim, here, this is yours. I don't ever want to hear about it again. And a lot of dentists abdicate when what needs to happen is delegation. And like I say, if you want to advocate, no problem at all. Just don't do it as a practice owner.
Yeah. Well, and even coming back to that, on average, about 2 hours a month. Do you have any stats on what the average embezzlement from an office ends up looking like in terms of dollar amounts?
I can be pretty precise on that one. The last time we looked from our files, it was $109,000.
$109,000.
That's the average.
Wow. And so, at 2 hours a month, what is that? That's $55,000 an hour you're saving.
That's a little less than that, I think. Yeah. But, because it's 2 hours a month for your entire career as a practice owner.
Okay. But that's a pretty good ROI, if you ask me.
Yeah. And you know what? The money tells part of the story and not all of it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of dentists who are embezzled are devastated emotionally. We did an investigation for a guy last year, probably in his late 50s. He had lost $160,000 roughly from it. And once it was all cleaned up, he had a young associate. He turned around to that associate probably 5 years earlier than his initial plan was, and he sold the practice. And he said, after that experience, I'm just not enjoying being a practice owner anymore. So, the emotional damage from this can be significant.
Oh, I would imagine so, because oftentimes these are trusted people in your office. They're people you have a relationship with, and there's just that sense of betrayal And so the emotional toll, I would guess, is probably in some cases harder than the financial toll.
100% agree with you.
Yeah.
You know, the money you can replace.
Yep.
The stomach lining is a little bit harder.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot harder to replace that. So I'm Tim McNeely. You've been listening to the Dental Wealth Nation show. We've been talking with David Harris about embezzlement. And David, I certainly understand that it's a much bigger problem than we've ever imagined, with 7 out of 10, 70% of dentists facing embezzlement at some point in their career. And we've been going through, some of the ways you can protect yourself from having everything you've worked so hard for from being unjustly taken. And we've talked about some of those protection strategies. We've talked about why people embezzle, and even changing the thought process. And I want to dive in and talk a little bit about some embezzlement myths. Are there some common misconceptions about embezzlement that you'd like to dispel, or some things that you hear dentists say that you're like, that's just not even close to the truth? You froze. Hey there, folks. We got a temporary hang up. We're waiting for David to come back on. It looks like there was a little internet connection issue, but we will be back shortly. Let's just hang out here and wait for him to pop back on here. The beauty of the platform is the recording will take place and we can edit this all out. So it's going to work just fine. I'll give him a second to log back in here. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back.
Tim.
Hey, someone was embezzling our internet connection, apparently.
1 second. All right. Hey, Tim, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. I can hear you.
Darn it. I can't hear you, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let's try this real quick. Audio. Yeah, I see my audio coming in. So that's working. Hello.
Tim?
Yes.
There. Ha. Sorry, my computer completely froze there.
Oh, that's all right. I was just making a joke. Someone's embezzling our internet connection.
It wasn't something you said.
No, but hey, we'll jump back in. I was talking about some common myths that you hear. Are there some common misconceptions within the dental practices that you'd like to dispel?
All kinds. The first one is, when I talk to a lot of dentists about embezzlement, the picture they have is the theft of $20 bills. And to be clear, cash is every thief's first choice, but it's certainly not their only choice. I'm not going to get into details here, but I will say that it's not hard to steal checks, to steal credit card payments, or even to redirect electronic funds transfers. So the first thing I'll say is you need to think a little bit broader in the concept that, because you have some practices that even stopped taking cash completely in COVID, and they thought that, that would protect them totally against embezzlement. It will not. Other myths. A lot of people think that there's something that makes them immune. My staff have been with me forever, or I work in a small town, and really embezzlement only happens in big cities where you end up hiring people you don't know as well. Or, gee, I'm a specialist, and embezzlement is really something that afflicts those poor general dentists, or whatever. I mean, people will come up with reasons why they're immune, and none of them apply. No thief says, I really want to steal, but I work in an ortho practice, and I just can't steal from an orthodontist. No, embezzlement happens because somebody who works for you decides that they have more rights to your money than you do. End of story. That can happen anywhere. I mean, it has nothing to do with you or your situation. And embezzlement is all driven by a staff member and what they decide to do. Other myths. My accountant, if it was happening, my accountant would catch it.
Well, right. That feels like a real common and easy assumption to make is, right, my accountant's looking at all these things. I should be safe, right?
Yeah, no. First of all, most stealing in dental practices happens on the revenue side. In other words, it's theft of patient payments or insurance payments. In a lot of other businesses, when theft happens, it happens predominantly on the expense side, payroll, or fraudulent purchases or something like that. And those things happen, but the main event in dentistry is revenue side theft. Your accountants do not look at that at all. What people don't realize is that unlike most professions, dentistry keeps two sets of books. In other words, there's practice management software that looks after revenue, and there's accounting software like QuickBooks or something that looks after expenses. And the two of them don't talk to each other, and the accountants don't have any reason in what they're doing to look at your practice management software, and yet that's where the bodies are buried.
Wow. So really, right, the whole accountant myth really happens because the accountants are seeing the books most likely after the embezzlement has taken place.
That's right. Well said. And I can give you some numbers on this. When you look at all industries globally, so dentistry, but everything else as well, and you look at how much, or you look at how embezzlement is uncovered in the whole world, accountants find about 40% of the embezzlement that's ever discovered. In dentistry, that number is more like 5%.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're not your front line of defense, and that's a very common misbelief.
So really, what is the front line of defense then?
It's the doctor. And possibly if they have a bookkeeper or they get somebody doing some very specific oversight for them, that can constitute part of the front line. But my point is, the normal accounting process that your CPA firm goes through at the end of each year is not very likely in dentistry to uncover embezzlement.
Wow. So if you're a doctor, right, if you're concerned about this as well, you should, and you take some time to implement some basic systems. Is this something you got to stay up at night worrying about, or can you have some confidence in the systems that you actually put in your practice?
If they're good systems, and that's a big if. But if you've got good systems, they will go a long way to helping you sleep. The systems that most practices have, frankly, are terrible. And I look at a hypothetical 40-year-old dentist now, and they probably bought their practice from somebody who's 25 or 30 years older than they are. So that practice's systems were built in the time before there were computers. They were probably also built at the time when most dentists were male and what their wives did in general was run their office. In other words, the economic interests of a husband and wife, until they decide to get divorced, are completely parallel. And a lot of systems were really designed to catch that occasional spouse who couldn't add, more so than any kind of dishonesty.
Hmm.
So the whole premise on which most systems are built is well outdated.
Wow. And so, right, just coming back to some closing thoughts here, right? We've got your book, Stealers and Healers, and give me a walkthrough of your first book and your second book, real quick.
The first book is fairly short. It's quite light. I mean, if you can't read it in 3 trips to the bathroom, you probably need a GI consult. And it's a good superficial treatment of the topic. When I went to write the second book, and the first one, Tim, was done on a bit of a timetable. In other words, my marketing people gave me a deadline and said, we need your manuscript by July 1st. So I did it's a good, worthwhile book. And as I say, if you want a light treatment of the topic, that's the one. When I did the second book, which took me another 3 years after the first one to get out, I wrote the book I really wanted to write, and I had no time pressure now, and I could go back and write a whole lot more detail. So my first book is about 100 pages. My second one's 350. And as I say, a lot more detail, a lot more kind of procedural. Here's how to whatever, here are the questions to ask somebody's former employers when you're looking at hiring. It's kind of at that level. And I have to acknowledge some members of my team, because my name is on the book as the author, but the contribution of several members of our team is pretty significant there.
Wow. Well, right. It takes a team to do anything. I certainly learned that doing my first book. It's a lot of effort and a lot of work, and you need the right people behind you. So coming to this problem, right? We know it's a widespread problem. 70% of dentists or will face some kind of embezzlement. What's the awareness of the problem, and how concerned are doctors about this? And I ask that because in my industry, we've got this major disconnect between the things that doctors say they're concerned about. They say they're concerned about asset protection. They say they're concerned about tax planning. They say they're concerned about transitioning their practice. But then we ask a secondary question, which is, well, have you taken any action or consulted anyone on these? And all of a sudden, those numbers are really, really low. So major disconnect between kind of, yeah, I'm concerned about this. I know it's a problem, but no, I haven't done anything about it. So do you find that's the same with dealing with embezzlement and really putting systems and processes in place in the practice also?
Definitely. I mean, being concerned is free.
Mm-hmm.
Acting on those concerns tends to cost money.
Yeah.
So the first one is a lot easier to say yes to than the second one. And we get exactly the same thing. When I speak to dentists in live audiences, one of the questions I tend to ask them is, would you like to contact us? Would you like us to contact you about protecting your practice? And a good proportion of them will say yes. The proportion of that group who will do anything is pretty small, because saying yes is free. But there's some cost, both in monetary outlay and also in their time and mental energy to doing something.
Yeah. Wow. Well, based on this conversation, I'd prefer to have you in my practice before something happens, not after. I'd prefer to pay that first cost instead of the second one.
We had one of our victims, who is an orthodontist, who lost $380,000 to his office manager. When I asked him one day, and he was nice enough to record a video on this, we had the video on him, and the question was, if you were going to give advice to another dentist based on your experience, what would it be? And what he said, and I'll quote him as close to verbatim as I can: you're not going to get your money back. You're not going to get your sleep back. Just put the safeguards in place to prevent this.
Wow.
Now, I'll modify what he said a little bit. Everybody who's stolen from gets some of their money back. It's a minority who get it all back. So I think what he's saying is, you're going to be out of pocket at some amount. But yeah, just put the safeguards in place. Do it. That was his advice to every dentist.
Yeah, and I think that's very, very sound advice, right? It's almost like winning a litigation, right? You can go win a court case, you can get a big old judgment from someone, but collecting on it's a whole other problem.
Yeah, and that's one of the impediments to getting your money back. I mean, most of the people who are stealing your money are at least as good at spending it as they are at stealing.
Yep.
Now, one thing you were asking about myths. Another thing most dentists don't realize is that they all have insurance coverage for this. Unfortunately, it tends to be a modest amount, but almost every dentist has $25,000 of insurance coverage. So if you've been stolen from, that's assuming the proper groundwork is done, that's pretty easy to get back. If somebody took 100,000 from you, getting the other 75,000 may be harder, but the first 25 is pretty easy to get. So almost everybody who's been stolen from will be cash positive at the end of our work.
Yeah. Wow. So David, how can we get in touch with you? How can doctors find you?
Well, the easiest place probably is our website, which is www.prosperident, prosperident.com. Or they can call us at 888-398-2327. So 888-398-2327. Those are the best ways. We're happy to talk to any dentist who says I have concerns, or I want to protect myself, or I just want to make sure that it's not happening. We can deal with any of those things.
Yeah. Well, and it's such an important topic. So, I find that in my world, there's 5 chief concerns that the doctors have. Number 1 is they want to make smart choices with their money. Number 2, they want to mitigate their taxes. But the third biggest concern they have is they want to make sure their assets aren't unjustly taken through theft or some other unjust means. Then they want to get the estate planning, take care of the next generation. And then about a third of them are very charitably inclined. But the third biggest problem, the third biggest concern they have is asset protection. And that's why what you do is so important. And thank you for being dentistry's crime fighter and getting out there and helping to not just solve the problems, but also prevent them. And that's so important. And so before we sign off here, any closing thoughts?
I will quote a former president: trust, but verify.
Well said. And actually, you know what? We'll come back to that closing thought because I think it's so powerful. And that's another lesson. So I've studied the super rich quite a bit. I don't have any super rich clients, but I want to learn from super rich. And when I say super rich, I'm talking people with a net worth north of $500 million. And they establish family offices. They build a team of the best individuals. And one of these things that these family offices do on a regular basis, actually every about 3 to 4 years, is they run a stress test of their plans. They want to make sure it's going to deliver as promised. And just like you said, they want to trust, but verify. And so I think those are words of wisdom, David.
Well, I'm glad to hear the billionaires agree with me. That's tremendously reassuring.
They absolutely do. And they do it on a regular basis. In fact, they find it strange if they're not stress testing things. And so, well, hey, thank you again for sharing so generously. And such an important topic. And I would encourage you, if you're listening this right, being concerned about something is free. Taking action does take a little bit of cost, both in your time and money, but a little bit of prevention can go a long, long way. So protect yourself, protect what you've worked so hard for. David, thank you again for being an amazing guest.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you again here soon on the Dental Wealth Nation show.
You've been listening to Dental Wealth Nation. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Join us next time as we pull back the curtain to reveal the often hidden advice and strategies used by today's most successful individuals and families, and help maximize your net worth so you can take even better care of the people you love. Till next time, make sure to hit the website at dentalwealthnation.com.